Hey guys, by the way, just a heads up, I'm currently recovering from a cold, which you will no doubt notice throughout the video. I sound pretty congested, but I hope it doesn't bother you too much. Just want to let you know in case you wonder why I sound different. But yeah, hopefully I'll feel better by the next video. Anyways, enjoy. Ever since the Champion Design team went about a new fashion of gameplay for modern day releases beginning in 2015, their success rate when it comes to new innovative ideas has always been on the lower end, implying their push to novelty has a higher chance of a badly designed champion than a well-designed one. In their defense, however, that success rate isn't zero, and they have managed to pull off some excellent releases that are both appreciated by the community and an objectively healthy addition to the game. One such instance was Jhin, who released roughly 9 years ago and has remained one of the best designed champions in League of Legends to this day. Not only were people enthralled by his design quirks and motifs, but they were also pleasantly surprised to see how those motifs influenced his gameplay in a way that made practical sense for the game. This was also just after the Marksman update earlier that same year, which oversaw a concerted effort in distinguishing and updating AD carries, a class that prior to Season 6 struggled with many of its members feeling the same. Jhin couldn't be any more different from the Marksman that came before, and while empirically being different puts you at risk of being unpopular, Jhin actually managed to become one of the game's most iconic and most popular ADCs of all time, routinely hovering above double-digit pick rate and on many occasions breaking into the top 3. This is also accompanied by a fairly stable ban rate profile as well. So for today's episode of Why Everyone Plays, we'll be discussing how Jhin defied all conventions to cement himself as one of the most popular champions in League. Jhin's popularity can be traced all the way back to before he was even added to the game. No doubt many longtime players recall the months leading up to his debut featuring trailers and cinematic shots of him appearing to assassinate other champions. I can still vividly recall the visuals of him ostensibly killing Zed, Sona, Vi, and Garen. The striking yet unsettling visual differences between him and your garden variety marksman was also very curious. Not to mention the music, voice acting, and distinctions giving way to a champion the player base was infectiously excited for. As someone who's been playing for over a decade, I find the juxtaposition both fascinating but also kind of sad. New champions nowadays are barely given the same excitement and hype, whereas back in the mid-2010s, every single new champion that came out was a big event, and Jhin was the biggest of that time period. The way they executed his release was instrumental towards establishing his legacy, tying in the theme of his obsession with the number 4, which in Asian languages carries the same sound as the word death, along with how it feels as if his abilities were designed with complete intent, compared to other champions who feel as if their elements were just thrown in there for the sake of being in there. You'd be hard-pressed to find anything about Jhin from either a conceptual or experiential standpoint that's outright bad. A sentiment that would then be further complemented by an impressive resume of practical aspects to boot. The ADC role carried a bit of notoriety back then in that before jungle became the be-all end-all is perceived to be today, ADC had the highest barrier to entry due to the mechanical execution that was demanded of you. From mastering high EPM inputs through attack moving or having precise accuracy in landing skill shots, the expectations of AD carry set it noticeably apart from the other 4 roles. Moreover, when you account for the vast majority of marksmen in League being valued only for one singular aspect, their damage, failing to provide that would essentially make you dead weight. People who were autofilled ADC were at a noticeable disadvantage, especially when facing an ADC main, as the role was all about damage and execution, and there were few if any methods of overlap when it came to transferring your skills and muscle memory from top, jungle, mid, and support to ADC. Sure, you could play a mechanically intensive champion like Riven top or Zed mid, but the experience of a squishy ranged marksman predicated on basic attacking rather than skill inputs was a measurable departure to say the least. All the more reason why a champion like Jhin was so appealing. As everyone should know by now, the defining trait of Jhin is his modified basic attack. While other marksmen are known for being able to attack as often as their attack speed can afford to, Jhin does not gain attack speed through anything except his own scaling. In addition, after firing 4 shots, he has to wait 2.5 seconds to reload before he can attack again. While on its own that would be a negative, the privileges he requires in lieu of it make for an absolutely worthwhile trade-off, in that every final bullet per round is a guaranteed critical strike that also deals % missing health damage, effectively turning Jhin's auto attacks into an execute. Not just that, but he also gains bonus attack damage equal to a flat scaling that increases with bonus crit chance and attack speed, which makes Jhin have by far the highest possible attack damage in the game. It's not unusual for him to reach above 800 AD towards the late game, the classic dynamic of trading speed for power. This gives Jhin a completely unique identity in comparison to the dozens of marksmen that came before him, and it also presents a beginner-friendly alternative that players could turn to if they weren't able or willing to learn how to attack move at high frequency or bank their entire DPS on skill shots. The increased attack scaling along with the execute on the 4th shot gives you comparable DPS to other marksmen but without the need to turn on tool-assisted superplay. The burst of speed given upon scoring a critical strike also makes Jhin surprisingly fast towards the mid to late game, giving him ever so slightly more evasion than the likes of Ashe, Kog'Maw, Aphelios, and such. Secondarily, Jhin's other abilities are also very beginner-friendly for a marksman. Dancing Grenade is a point-and-click projectile whose power increases on the next target if it kills the one prior. All you have to do is aim it at the lowest health minion, and with an item or two, it should insta-kill the other minions with only 1 or 2 upgrades. It might not be nearly as good for wave clearing as maybe Sivir's Ricochet, but it gets the job done. Point being, it's digestible but effective. Deadly Flourish is a skill shot, and a very narrow one at that, but the long range of the ability means you don't have to be in prime position to capitalize on the full extent of it. Moreover, the purpose of Deadly Flourish is utility, not damage, and so, missing 1 or 2 of them every so often, while inconvenient, does not result in a completely useless champion the way missing 1 or 2 Ezreal Qs does for him. From just his passive Q and W alone, Jhin makes one thing very clear: you can pick him up and have a good baseline performance using not much more than good old fundamentals. Mechanics are the last thing you need to worry about when operating Jhin at a basic level. You just need good awareness and a rudimentary understanding of player movement habits, and there you go. Not saying Jhin doesn't have high outplay potential, it's just that he's a champion whose value is easily attainable just by understanding the game, and less about having good mechanics. It's easy to maintain focus and situational awareness in team fights and skirmishes when you're not forced to play Osu in League. Jhin's maximum DPS ceiling is of course nowhere near the level of say a super on a 1v9er like Vayne or team fighting monster like Jinx, but it's competitive and a force to be reckoned with, which is just good enough. And like I said, he still feels like a marksman. Earlier I mentioned how gimmicky champions tend to insulate themselves from the rest of their cast. For example, Callista's a weird marksman to pick up on the basis of martial poise, or Neela being a melee marksman making her uncomfortable to play. But if say you're a mid lane mage main, you can take those fundamentals and apply it to Jhin, who is for all intents and purposes a hybrid between a marksman and a mage. He has a gimmick, but that gimmick was constructed in a way that still lines up with the experience of playing a marksman. On to reason number 2, consistency, which sort of builds off reason 1 being his accessibility. A huge aspect of why people like to use Jhin is that he's one of the few marksmen in the game who can contribute meaningful pressure no matter the circumstance. The idea of marksmen having utility in their kit was practically non-existent before Jhin, and to be honest, it's still non-existent now. Next to Ashe and Vars, Jhin is one of the few marksmen in the game who can still do something for his team no matter if he's ahead or behind, and in a number of ways, prioritizing power over speed carries a lot of merit to it, especially in the modern day. In very few instances do ADC players get to actually free fire on a target for more than a couple seconds. They could have all the attack speed in the world, but if they only get to attack for 2 or 3 seconds before exploding or having to run away from enemy threat, it makes no difference. That's where Jhin comes in. Considering he can get the same amount of AD in 2 items that other marksmen take to get 4, he still gets to do a couple hundred damage per auto attack, and in fights where you only get to shoot maybe half a dozen times, he still does good DPS, especially against a squishy target. Then you also have to account for the built-in execute. Percent health damage contributes to consistency because it doesn't at all care about what your stats are, it cares about what the enemy's stats are. Jhin can be 0-20 and you still have to respect the 4th shot purely due to the missing health damage. On that note, there are fights where the marksman might be too scared to walk up to attack because they don't want to get in range of the enemy Vi or get flanked by the blue king waiting for them to step up too far or things like that. Jhin gets to work around this with the rest of his kit. Deadly Flourish adds to his consistency by not only allowing him to contribute damage and crowd control from a far distance, but also affording the player a wider margin for error. No other class values positioning more than marksman. Considering how close you have to fly to the sun to apply pressure, all while being at risk of blowing up yourself, you have a very tight window of opportunity to attack enemies and apply your DPS before you either have to retreat or you just explode. Experienced ADC mains know this and are always on the draw when it comes to capitalizing on opportunities. Lesser experienced ADCs might not be as quick to act, but Jhin can be a full screen away from the action and still get stuff done. If his ally Pantheon lands a stun on a target, even if he's far away, he can still follow up with a root. Captive Audience gets memed on for being that one trap that even if you set it off, you have enough time to simply walk out of it, but the point of the Lotus Trap is not for damage. Don't get me wrong, it does a ton of damage if it actually lands, but the real utility is that in addition to allowing Jhin free roots on Deadly Flourish, it also reveals enemies for 4 seconds, essentially giving Jhin free wards to place around the map before a teamfight. Sight for your team alleviates the need to face check rushes, and it can also slow enemy tempo down just enough to either cut off their escape or delay follow-ups. Finally, Curtain Call. One word, pressure. As a damaging ability, Curtain Call is actually one of the weaker ones out there. I feel like there are more cases where Jinx's rocket or Draven and Ezreal's penetrating projectiles are more reliable when it comes to sniping off enemies. But the one advantage, or should I say 2 advantages that Jhin has, are time and chances. I heard some people argue Jin's ultimate should not reveal the massive cone to enemies because it makes them easy for them to get ready to dodge, but that's exactly the point. The real value of Curtain Call is not the damage of the attack, even though to its credit it does do a lot, especially to low health enemies. It's an extra layer added onto the enemy team's mental stack. If you're engaging in a 1v1 fight, let's say you're playing, I don't know, Yasuo and you're up against the enemy Sylas, then all of a sudden you hear the violin and a massive cone of light. Suddenly you have two things to worry about, which can and will split your attention and distract you just enough to greatly increase your chances of misplaying. A moment's hesitation can make all the difference in winning or losing a fight, especially in the late game where one ability takes away half your health. Jhin can miss all 4 shots, but the point is that it forces the opponent to acknowledge that they're under fire. Curtain Call can hold for up to 10 seconds. Jhin can intentionally hold fire and run the clock just for the mental pressure. If you see an Ashe Arrow or Ezreal ultimate fly past you, assuming they're not already nearby, it might have been a minor jump scare, but it's done and over with. Jhin can sit there with his ultimate active and watch you pee your pants waiting for it to be over. Since he can fire 4 times, and especially if you're at low HP, any of those shots can be the one that does you in. No matter what the situation, he can apply non-negligible pressure. He does good damage on his 4th shot even when behind. He can set up his team with a long-range route, and he can also provide cover fire for his team or follow up on their engage, giving him arguably the best utility out of any marksman depending on who you ask. It's a toolkit that anyone with basic fundamentals can understand and apply at a competent level. It's also just satisfying. Landing a 4th shot execute on a target or the final Curtain Call shot on a low health enemy gives off a nice visual flare and explosion sound that makes you feel like you're the best player on earth. Finally, we arrive at reason number 3, freedom, which once again adds to reason number 2, which adds to reason number 1. Jhin's a very expressive champion who can be played in a number of ways. You don't have to play him in one specific way like you have to for most other carries. While several aspects of his kit may suggest he's a lot more restrictive than his peers, he makes up for it in other ways. For example, not gaining attack speed practically disqualifies him from building on it effects, but in return, the sheer AD scaling from his passive has enabled him historically to run alternative builds like Lethality, where he can straight up one-tap squishies with Collector, Ghostblade, Dustblade back when it used to be a thing, and so on. He also scales unreasonably well with Dark Harvest and Fleet Footwork before it got nerfed. I remember seeing a Jhin recover like 400 HP off a single Fleet Footwork proc. Over the years, you would find anything that depended on AD ratio over attack speed being abused by Jhin. When Gale Force was still around, Jhin players loved this item for not only helping with mobility, but also the sheer DPS it would do on its own. While other ADCs would only do maybe a couple hundred damage, Jhin could do well over like 800 on a single target with the item active, since he would have 900 AD or something late game. Dustblade, back when it was around, had the same principle where it would do bonus damage on the first attack, which if you combined it with Rapid Fire Cannon, would allow Jhin to do ridiculous damage on the first hit. Items aside, playstyle is another aspect of Jhin that lends credence to his freedom and flexibility. All things considered, you can play him like a traditional marksman shooting anything that moves, but you can also play him like an artillery mage and provide long-range fire. The ability to play further back gives Jhin an overall safe laning phase as he doesn't have to approach to deal damage or even farm. Dancing Grenade might have the same initial cast range as his auto attacks, but the bounce can extend the range even farther, and he can also use Captive Audience to thin down waves before it crashes to your tower. There are multiple use cases for every aspect of his kit that can allow for a champion you realistically never get bored of. Basically, everything about Jhin has purpose to it. Even if it may seem like a detriment at first, there's a reason behind it. He doesn't gain attack speed, but he does gain ridiculous amounts of AD and movement speed. His traps don't guarantee damage, but they allow for good vision control and long-range setup. His W is extremely thin and doesn't do much damage, but it's a semi-global attack, making it at times better than other straight-line missiles like Jinx's and Zeri's. Dancing Grenade has a fixed number of targets, but it's an auto-homing projectile. Curtain Call can get body blocked and the shots can be fairly hard on accuracy, but it's compensated by the pressure of the ability. Jhin is an atypical bot laner, but he achieves this without trading pragmatic value. In essence, while other marksmen have ABC strengths, Jhin has XYZ strengths. Those XYZ strengths just happen to line up nicely to create a marksman that can be enjoyed by both ADC and non-ADC players. And also, this is worth mentioning, he's one of the few champions in the game that is unanimously respected by the community, which helps to keep his ban rate low and give everyone a chance to play him. Definitely one of the best designed champions in League, if not the best designed champion of all time. I'm surprised it took me this long to make a video about him, but I suppose better late than never. What are your thoughts about Jhin? Do you agree with my points or do you think it's something else? Feel free to share it in the comments down below. Once again, I apologize for sounding congested in this video. I hope it goes away soon, but for the time being, if you enjoyed the video in spite of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why Everyone Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.